Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us and welcome to this webinar on supply chain fundamentals. I'm Jimmy Moore and today I'll be joined by my colleague Ian Taylor. We're both a part of the supply chain solutions team of Invest Northern Ireland. This webinar, it's one of a series of webinars on supply chain topics, and if you want and if you're interested, you can go and access all of them on the Invest Northern Ireland website. The focus of today is to try and help you to build an understanding of what the different elements, the high-level elements are of supply chain management, and more importantly, how they might help you improve your business. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the chat box and we try to get as many as we can at the end of the webinar. But besides that, thank you very much for your attendance and we will now start the webinar. Welcome to today's webinar on supply chain management fundamentals. By the end of this session, you should have gained a better understanding of what supply chain management is and appreciation of how it can have a positive effect on your business and results. Supply chain support from Invest Northern Ireland is provided by the Supply Chain Resilience and Development Solutions Team, or SCRDS for short. We are a team of supply chain professionals seconded from business and have experience in implementing supply chain improvement in a wide range of industries. Our role is to work with businesses to analyse what they do, advise where development is possible, and provide mentoring and support through projects to deliver tangible value and cost savings. We can also provide financial support for a supply chain role in your company to deliver supply chain improvement if the resource or skills do not exist at present. We engage with our clients in three different ways, primarily through direct engagement, helping clients to improve how they manage their supply chain, by developing capability with our clients' organizations through workshops and masterclasses, and finally, by providing a body of knowledge through webinars like this and online tutorials. The objective of this webinar is to help you understand what supply chain management is and its main components. It's a fairly high-level view, but hopefully it will be enough to trigger some questions around how you make your changes in your processes, which will in turn build resilience, reduce costs, and improve performance. So what is supply chain management? There are many definitions from industry and academia, but a good way to paraphrase them is that supply chain management is the group of processes for acquiring, moving, and storing the materials and information needed to fulfill your customer needs. As with all business processes, there are tools that can be used to improve performance, and we will introduce many of these tools during the webinar today. Supply chain management dates back to the shipyards in Japan in the 1950s, where there was a drive to remove waste and reduce product cycle times. The car manufacturing industry was the first to adopt it as an arm of their strategy towards just-in-time materials management. Due to the success of this approach, other industries soon began to tailor the process to their own needs, to the extent that by the early 2000s, supply chain excellence was a prerequisite of being considered world-class. More recent supply chain developments have been around driving data interconnectivity to remove waste and increase responsiveness. To help you get on the development path, we have categorized the main elements of supply chain management and provided an explanation of how these can improve your business. This should make it easier for you to understand where it is best to start your improvement journey. Supply chain management is probably best understood by describing the components or inputs that make it up. These are risk analysis and control, sourcing negotiation, purchasing strategy and processes, supplier relations management, MRP and digitization, demand, supply and inventory management, warehouse and logistics, and how you manage your sustainable supply chain. The performance of each of these elements has then a direct impact on key business results, such as revenue, cost of materials, cash flow, and customer satisfaction. Enhanced performance can be achieved through identifying your major pain points and delivering projects to improve your processes in these areas. This slide shows some of the many approaches and tools that can be used, and we will touch on some of these through the webinar. First element we will address is risk management, so I'll now hand you over to my colleague Ian.
So the first element we're going to look at today is risk management. This is where we would suggest you start, as implementing some form of risk management is necessary to improve the resilience of your supply base, and it's best to develop on a stable foundation. To give supply chain risk management some context, it is similar in approach to other audit-based risk systems you probably have, such as health and safety management or financial management. As complexity of supply chains increase by remoteness or by the number of links in the chain, and so does the risk of price changes and delivery failure, which in turn will impact your business results when disruption occurs. A good way of identifying risks is looking at how vulnerable a supplier is to unexpected events. And the greater the vulnerability, the bigger the risk. There are some well-established tools to help identify and predict supply chain risk. One such tool is the CrowdStrike model. It categorizes your suppliers according to the potential impact of supply failure to your business. Once a supplier is categorized, the model has built-in suggested actions for mitigation. It is a data-driven model, but once set up, it's easy to maintain. And finally, the key is to ensure any identified risks are followed up with actions. How and when you collect your data can be tailored to your circumstances. But once those risks are identified, you need to work with your supply base to mitigate them. It takes time, so it's important that it remains visible, reviewed regularly through your management system, either daily or weekly meetings. Once implemented, your resilience will improve, and this will help avoid negative impacts of supply chain disruption, both to your product availability and to material costs. The next element to consider is how you source and purchase your materials. Most companies are already working on improvements in this area, as it's the most visible element of supply chain management to other parts of the business. However, past cost increases of container transport from Asia has changed the dynamics of sourcing for a lot of materials. So moving the source supply closer to home is now a strategic challenge for local businesses. Our team here at Invest A&I can help provide support in this area through modelling tools such as a total cost model and supplier profiling, as well as advice on where to source. We're also keen to look at potential reshoring opportunities with other local businesses where the conditions suit. Supplier selection. Remember, when selecting a supplier, consider factors such as reliability, quality, costs, and communication. Conduct thorough evaluations and weigh the pros and cons of each option to make an informed decision. Establish criteria for evaluation. Screen those suppliers. Evaluate and select suppliers. Audit supplier sites. If you can't audit on site, then perhaps you can do a desktop audit or hire a third party. Finalize the supplier agreement and the relationship management. Negotiation process. Preparation. Understand your needs. Set your goals. Research market conditions. At the opening meeting, initiate the negotiation. Have clear communication and establish a positive rapport. Exploration. Discuss needs and priorities openly. Seek mutual understanding. Offer and counter-offer. Propose and counter-propose. Is it price, term, or quantities? Close the deal. Reach a mutually acceptable agreement with your supplier. Implementation. Ensure smooth execution of the negotiated terms, maintaining a good relationship for future collaboration. Why are we talking about strategy? Basically, strategy is about navigating an organization forward and adopting the change. And there are a number of ways to think about that. Why is strategic sourcing important to your supply chain? Well, strategic sourcing is an approach to supply chain management, formalizing the way information is gathered and used. It lets an organization consolidate its purchasing power, finding the best possible values in the marketplace, and aligning its purchasing strategy to its business goals. Remember, if your business is changing, then you need your supply chain to move along with you. Supply chain strategy. A supply chain strategy is like a roadmap that helps companies get their products to customers with as little friction as possible. This plan ensures that every phase of the supply chain is optimized, including the sourcing of materials, the manufacturing of components, the delivery and the logistics of all of that. If one of your company values is ethical trading, then you will want to be confident your products and services have been made at the expense of workers in global supply chains enjoying their rights. The supply chain strategy doesn't stop at where to source parts, but what sort of supplier do you need and how do you manage them? Companies often take this approach at a commodity level. Understand your business goals. Clearly comprehend your overall business objectives with your long-term vision. Collaborate with stakeholders. Align procurement goals with broader business strategies. Identify potential risks. Align procurement strategies to mitigate them effectively. Cost management. Align procurement efforts with cost-saving initiatives, contributing to overall financial goals. Supplier relationship management. Fostering strong relationship with your suppliers, enhancing collaboration with achieved shared objectives. Innovation integration. Align procurement strategies to support innovation within the business, fostering that competitive edge. Ensure procurement strategies are both flexible and adaptable to changing business conditions and market dynamics. And continuous improvement. Implement feedback loops and regularly evaluate and improve procurement processes to align with ever-evolving business needs. So why have a supply chain strategy? Most SMEs see supply chain management as a transactional function, where the tasks to get materials delivered to the factory or warehouse are identified and allocated to one or many people in the organisation. And management is by exception, only getting involved if things don't happen as planned. Without a strategy that reacts to change, you're left with ineffectiveness and vulnerability. A dynamic strategy that responds to change is crucial if you're to adapt to evolving market conditions, customer demands, and unforeseen challenges. As businesses grow, they see the benefits of managing the different supply chain elements using data, measuring performance to help improve delivery results to customers and stakeholders. Eventually, through many development cycles, the supply chain function becomes embedded in the company's strategy, delivering results to all areas of the business, even influencing customers' purchase decisions. So the benefits of having a supply chain strategy. A well-defined supply chain strategy can enhance efficiency, reduce costs, improve customer satisfaction, and provide that competitive edge by optimizing processes, managing risks, and fostering innovation. However, probably the most important result of taking a strategic approach is that the company and the supply chain will be far more adaptable to change. Segmenting suppliers. The Kraljack matrix was developed as a way to analysing the portfolio of a company, determining the optimal sourcing strategies for each product or service. The matrix divides a purchasing portfolio into 4 quadrants based on 2 criteria: supply risk and profit impact. In simple terms, this Kraljack matrix is a tool used to manage and analyse a company's purchasing activities. So routine, low profit impact, low supply risk. Example, office supplies. Leverage, high profit impact, low supply risk. Example, bulk commodities. Then looking at bottleneck, strategic. Forces you to think strategically about suppliers instead of focusing on deals. Focusing your efforts where profits are most significant. Category management. A category management approach can also be taken when defining your supply chain processes. It involves segmenting spend according to market sectors or value streams for manufacturing, and is very effective in linking your strategy for sourcing and purchasing materials with the requirements of the end user. A common category management tool for supply chain is tail spend analysis. Here we analyze spend by material and supplier, seeing where there are opportunities to increase leverage by reducing the number of low volume suppliers while making the purchase process more efficient by reducing in-purchase order processing. Again, revenue, gross margin, overhead efficiency, and customer service can be improved with this approach. Supplier relationship management. The fourth element is supplier relationship management. It is probably the hardest supply chain element to qualify in terms of business results, but it is one that is most important to ensure successful delivery of all the other elements. Supplier management is about moving to a collaborative approach to dealing with our suppliers, treating them as partners rather than transactional vendors. This means that when problems occur or delivery and cost challenges need to be met, a strong trust-based relationship already exists, so issues can be worked through as both parties are invested in a longer-term goal. As with all business relationships, there needs to be a clear understanding on both sides of what is required. This can be achieved through the use of scorecards and supplier reviews. A scorecard is a data-based approach which provides clear visibility of what standards are expected and how both sides are performing. Then, through regular reviews, a good working relationship can be developed, so challenges can be discussed and a shared solution met. When implemented, a supplier relationship management approach can contribute to cost reduction and improve material delivery and quality. Scorecards by nature are data-driven, but what you include should be what's important to your business. This will ensure the conversation with your suppliers remain focused on what is important to both parties. Now I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Jimmy, who will continue on with the next elements.
Thank you, Ian. The next element we will look at is supply chain digitization. This is a hot topic at the minute, with a general consensus that digitization is at least part of the solution of many of our supply chain woes. While this will probably be true in the not too distant future, it needs to be recognised that many advanced solutions are still in development, and even the simpler packages can be expensive. This slide shows the typical progression through to supply chain digitization. Many businesses have adapted steps 1 and 2 through things like MRP and data analytics. Though steps 3 to 5 are not as prevalent, mainly due to cost and the need for tailored solutions. One approach that can help most businesses is the use of Materials Requirements Plan, or MRP. This is a software package that automates the process of calculating which materials need to be ordered, cancelled, or expedited by comparing demand, inventory, and future supply. There are many options on the market, and they basically all do the same thing, with the cost differential determined by brand or additional capabilities. Simple versions can be built in-house using standard spreadsheets such as Excel and Google Sheets if resource for the off-the-shelf package is not available. As with all software, this can be very powerful when used well, but can be a drain on resources if poorly designed or if data accuracy is not obtained to a very high level. An extension of some MRP systems is a built-in inventory management system, where MRP uses static trigger points and constant assumptions of future demand. These systems analyze historical trends and use more complex forecasting methods to calculate optimum inventory levels. These systems are very powerful, but also prohibitively expensive for most SMEs. What they do can, however, be taken offline using business analytics packages, but a high level of skill is needed to do this. Warehouse automation is often the area where many SMEs jump into their digitization journey. As warehouse efficiency and accuracy stagnate, it makes sense to investigate how software and physical digitization solutions can help. However, there is a wide range of solutions, so it can be difficult to figure out where to start. To aid your decision making, it is helpful to categorize the different solutions. Basic warehouse automation refers to simple technology that assists people with tasks that would otherwise require manual labor. For example, a conveyor or a carousel moving inventory from point A to point B. Warehouse management systems use software and data analytics to automate tasks and procedures. For example, a warehouse management system can batch all the orders that need to be filled in a time period and sequence the pick lists so pickers don't traverse the warehouse back and forth multiple times. Mechanized warehouse automation is a kind of warehouse automation that uses robotic equipment and systems to assist humans with warehouse tasks. An example is an autonomous mobile shelf loader robots that lift racks of products and deliver them to human pickers. And finally, there is advanced warehouse automation, which combines mechanized warehouse robotics and automation systems with the focus of replacing labor-intensive human workflows. Examples are robotic forklifts that use advanced AI cameras and sensors to navigate the warehouse to pick and deliver parts, or what is referred to as dark pallet warehouses, where large volume of pallets are put away and picked without any human interaction. Whichever solution approach you take, some important things to consider are first, that automation must be cost justifiable, so decide on a budget early on and know what returns you expect. And second, that you should be clear on which problem you're trying to solve before you embark on the automation or digitization journey. It is common to find yourself in the situation of having the technology and having to look for some problems to fix with. The next element is inventory management, and how you approach demand and supply impacts how much you hold. Looking at supply and inventory, we need to ask first, why do we hold it? A simple process map for a typical manufacturing company shows that there are many valid reasons to hold inventory levels well above what we need. Indeed, many companies and customer service departments feel that high inventory levels are very acceptable cost of customer service. However, how much does this cost? This is not widely understood, and a range of studies have shown this to be at least 15% of the value of the inventory per annum. High levels of inventory can be caused by overly simplistic reorder systems and policies employed in a complex environment. Inventory management strategy can be broken into two approaches: those where you plan to hold stock and those where you work towards not holding stock or minimizing it. As explained in the previous section, much of this is now managed through software, so the following slides will cover the theory behind the solution. By far the most prolific approach for managing how much you hold is using a reorder point, safety stock, and a reorder quantity. These are usually the methods built into off-the-shelf MRP systems, and while effective, it is important to understand that unless rules are updated regularly using recent demand and lead time data, they can still lead to too much or too little stock. Reorder point is set using an average demand rate multiplied by the product's lead time with a safety stock added. How much is to be ordered is usually set in line with an economic ordering frequency. The safety stock, as the name suggests, is calculated to cover for exceptions to the average demand. The simplest version is to use the maximum recent demand by the lead time minus the average to cover for what is the worst case. Demand forecasting is seen by many businesses as a dark art, little understood and avoided if possible. In reality, it is easy to implement as it is based on data, though some knowledge of statistical methods is beneficial, and these can be learned quickly. There are effective standalone complex systems available to carry out forecasting if your product base is very large. But for most SMEs, the best approach is to keep it at a simple level, using Excel or Google Sheets, but refresh regularly to pick up changes and deal with exceptions. This can be complemented by using statistical tools to analyze demand data and set a more precise confidence level rather than using the simplistic worst-case safety stock. If your business adopts a strategy to minimize the stock holding, this is normally done by deploying just in time. This is prevalent in the automotive industry, and when executed can lead to massive inventory reductions. It has to be company-wide though, and your processes need to be very, very stable before it will work. So it is not something that can be introduced quickly. Part of just-in-time that can be employed in any SME and that will reduce inventory holding is what is called a two-bin Kanban system, where parts are only replenished when needed by refilling an empty bin of two at regular intervals. This is normally used for high volume, lower value parts, and its management is often outsourced to vendors, which again adds further efficiency to your operations. The next element of supply chain management was warehousing and logistics. This is often seen as necessary costs, but these costs can be minimized while still retaining excellent service levels. Good warehouse processes can have a significant contribution to business success. as well as contributing to customer service levels, they impact cash flow, overheads, and direct costs. How the warehouse is set up and managed can also have a positive effect on your company's sustainability levels. Some things you should consider to ensure successful warehouse management are how your warehouse is organized to ensure efficient receiving, picking, and shipping, how you carry out your kitting to ensure the downstream functions are most efficient, what management metrics you use and how you improve, how you ensure accuracy through systems, automation, cycle counts, and what you do with your slow moving and obsolete stock. Our final element is supply chain sustainability. Like digitization, this is an area where consensus is that we need to introduce sustainable processes and supply chains must be decarbonised, but it is far from clear how this will be achieved. This slideshow shows a possible approach to introduce sustainability. What is clear from this is it will take a lot of time and substantial resource. The COP agreements recently are driving governments to engage with decarbonisations, and while the initial push is to reduce emissions through greening energy production, there will soon be a lot more focus on Scope 3 emissions that come from materials sourced from manufacturing and construction. This means that as well as focusing on how your company uses energy, you would expect it to reduce supply from high carbon industries and countries and reduce transport emissions by sourcing closer to home. This will take the form of legislation or taxation, which may differ depending where you sell your products and where you source your products. So what are the next steps? If you feel there are areas discussed today where you need help, a good starting point is to fill out our supply chain checklist. It covers many of the areas discussed today and provides a framework for an initial conversation with one of our team. Then, if you would like some support from our team of supply chain experts, please feel free to contact us by going to our Supply Chain Support Solutions webpage. Click on the Supply Chain Solutions online inquiry form towards the bottom, and someone will get in touch shortly. Thank you for your attendance today. Okay, so myself and Ian are now going to go through and answer some questions in this. One of the questions is around, well, there's a number of questions here in around risk and resilience. Just to summarize them, is basically, could you describe what risk and resilience are and how do you approach managing them?
Yes, good morning. Sorry, Jimmy, I'm having trouble here with the cam. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you okay.
Okay. So what is resilience in supply chain? Well, as we all know, changes are going to happen in our supply chain daily, weekly, and it's about how well we're set up to deal with those changes. You know, what extent a company can adapt to unplanned changes to its supply base. You know, how well are you equipped to deal with unplanned changes regarding rising costs, reduced availability of materials, or for example, extended lead times. So as I say, changes are going to occur in many aspects of our supply chain, and it's about how you manage your risk. You know, do you have a system? Do you have a process that manages that risk? You know, have you analysed your suppliers? Have you looked at your supply base? Have you identified any risks? For example, you know, suppliers who are not in the country, suppliers who are further afield. Is there, you know, a risk there of, for example, extended transportation, increasing transportation times, which is going to affect your lead times? You know, and how do you go about mitigating those? So understand your supply base and you know, work out with suppliers what materials are most, excuse me, are most risky in terms of cost, on-time delivery. As was shown here in our presentation, there are models that we have. There are models out there that you can use to identify the risks and mitigate those risks. You know,
so what models would you suggest to you?
I mean, one of the ones I would certainly start off with, the one I favour the first would be a supplier spend analysis. which, it breaks down all of your suppliers, what commodities they're supplying you with, how much you're spending on them, how long it takes to come in. You could also use the Qualtrics model, which was shown on screen there. And again, if there's anybody online here today that are facing some of these challenges, we're more than willing to, join up with them, come out and visit them and discuss these and see, can I find some solutions.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Ian. There's another couple of questions here, which is supposed to summarize them. It's really how do you reduce, how does supply chain management reduce your costs, which is very important. So again, this is one where we've got another webinar. If you go on our website, you can go into it in a lot of detail. And for the clients who work with us, we've got a very good workshop where we go through this type of detail. But just to summarize it, we very much take the approach of, you start off with looking at what your materials costs are and working with your suppliers. And again, there's a number of approaches you can take to reduce those. Basically, what you want to do is you want to increase your buying power, and you can do that a number of ways. First of all, like the strategy and the strategic approach that we had in the presentation, categorize your suppliers and work out which ones you're going to have to basically work with and partner with to see, okay, well, how much profit are you making, how much profit are we making, and see what ways you can actually reduce it. There are others where there are alternative suppliers, or there are a lot of suppliers where you can basically commoditize it and say, okay, we're going to just give our business to the one or two lowest bidders of what we want, because it's a product that we can get anywhere we want. And there are others where they're problem suppliers, where really what you need to do is you need to go out and do a bit of sourcing to try and reduce your materials for that. A second main area is to do with your labor costs and your indirect costs. This is more to do with making sure that your supply chain is stable, so that your downstream processes, whether it's just warehousing or whether it's you've got a factory that you're supporting and you're supplying into, that's the efficiency of those organizations within your business are as high as possible, because you are basically making sure your supply is as predictable as possible. And the last one really is down to inventory and cash. So like cash is expensive at the minute. So it's a matter of just making sure that you are minimizing or you're optimizing the amount of inventory that you have, and then you have to spend an awful lot of money borrowing or basically tying up cash in inventory that you don't really need. And the other side of that then is like payment terms for your suppliers. If you get very, very good payment terms to your suppliers, if you're cash poor, it might be an idea to go and take a look at that. So those are the areas of cost that I would take a look at. There's only another couple of questions here. So one of them is around the organization. How would you set up how does a supply chain, what does it look like within an SME organization specifically? And maybe you want to take that. Ian?
Yes, so where we just start? Well, it depends obviously on where the company is in its growth path. Most small businesses, I think it's recognized that it's a tactical necessary function. As companies grow, the supply chain function, it needs to move into the senior management team. Sometimes a lot of companies just see supply chain as a necessity and it just looks after itself, and we all know that that's not the case. So it needs to be structured inside the company. Senior management need to be involved, because it's important. It should be recognized that the supply chain, is fundamental in delivering your company's results. It facilitates downstream functions. It changes focus, to relationships based with your suppliers. I'm a great advocate of getting to know your supplier,
telling them about your company, telling them about your growth path, getting them on board, and making it more, rather than just a supplier and a customer faceless, get to know them better, explain to them where your company is today, where they're going tomorrow, where they're going to be in 5 years, so, and all that needs all brought together, and consider separating, your operations, your production and supply chain, especially for manufacturing companies, separate them so that you've got the supply chain operating in supply chain and production stays in its lane in production. And certainly, last week we had a masterclass where we spoke about, strategy. Supply chain needs to have a seat at that table for strategy discussions and decisions, so it follows that the right level of person is owning that function. Having a supply chain strategy, will give you efficiency, cost reduction, improve customer satisfaction. As I said, if you optimize your processes, it's going to make your company, more competitive. You're going to manage your risks, foster innovation within inside the company, and that means your supply chain also, and make your sales far more adaptable to change. And it does require some work, but I think I know that supply chain is an important part of a company's business.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. A couple of more specific questions have come through here. It says one on how can we suggest a rebate program to propose to suppliers? My response to that would be it kind of depends, but the ones that I've dealt with in the past aren't being based on volume or payment terms. So payment terms is simpler. If you pay on time, like, you get some rebate because the supplier you're dealing with, the cash is very important to them. And the one you see the most is based on volume, and really you have to sit down with your supplier or do a bit of investigation yourself as to how much will that extra volume business you're going to give them, what extra profit are they going to make, or what cost savings they're going to make, and then have a discussion with them as to what is fair, as to who's going to share in that saving. But certainly, if you're increasing volume, it is a way of either fixed prices or through rebates. It's a good way of getting a bit of money out of your suppliers. I would agree with that. The other one is on very specific on tariffs, and that's one where I'll say we've got the details of the people who asked the questions here, so we contact you directly on that. I think that's a bit too specific for us to give an answer right now. So that's it. That's for the questions that are there, and that's us wrapped up. So all I can just say is we've had that further support screen up through the questions and answers. So if you do need any support, or if you'd like to make contact with us, go on that web page and give us a shout, and one of us will be in touch, just to, even if you want to have a chat about what the problems that you have or the support that you need, that's no problem. Like, we've no problem giving you a call and having that type of chat. And that's normally when the projects develop. I don't think there's anybody who contacts who hasn't developed into a project of some sort. So again, thank you very much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed it.